History is always written by the victors. When a war ends, the winners become shining heroes, while the losers are automatically nailed to the cross of betrayal. In the annals of Middle-earth, the name Saruman the White is synonymous with corruption, greed, and ultimate sin. He is cursed as the backstabber of the free world, a half-baked tyrant blinded by power. But if we set aside moral emotions and look at the matter through the lens of a cold-blooded geopolitical strategist, a bitter question emerges. Perhaps Saruman did not betray at all. Perhaps he merely chose a more realistic path. Today, we will peel back the familiar villain facade to step into the mind of the greatest intellect of the White Council. Was Saruman a manipulated fool, or was he the only one sane enough to see a cruel truth that dreamers like Gandalf deliberately ignored? To understand Saruman's decision, we must understand the position and the massive volume of knowledge he held. Saruman was not a sword-wielding warrior going into battle like Aragorn, nor was he a wanderer roaming every nook and cranny like Gandalf. He was the greatest scientist, historian, and strategist that the gods ever sent down to Middle-earth. For millennia, while others sang, feasted, or dreamed of the glorious old days, Saruman locked himself in dusty libraries. He studied the history of dark magic, the making of the rings, and most importantly, he studied Sauron's true military potential. And the burden of this knowledge was a curse itself. When you know too much, you can no longer continue dreaming. Through ancient documents and the Palantir seeing stone itself, Saruman saw a cruel panoramic picture. He saw massive war machines breeding in the deep pits of Mordor. He counted the numbers of beast packs, the southern mercenary armies, numerous as ants. Meanwhile, looking back at his own side, what did he see? The kingdom of Gondor was rotting from the inside with a mad steward. The Rohan cavalry was sparse, declining. As for the elves, the most powerful faction, they were busy packing their bags to flee this world. There is a bitter truth that the Fellowship of the Ring faction never dared to state nakedly. Based on all military calculations, based on the science of logistics and force disparity, Middle-earth's win rate against Sauron was around 0%. No pragmatic general would throw their troops into a battle they knew with 100% certainty would be crushed into dust. Gandalf spoke of courage and hope, but to a calculating mind like Saruman's, hope is not a military strategy. Hope cannot stop an armor-piercing arrow, and friendship cannot tear down the great gates of the Tower of Barad-dûr. Furthermore, Saruman realized a harsh theological truth. The Valor gods had truly abandoned the earth. The western sky was terrifyingly silent. There would be no angelic army descending to save mankind like in the First Age anymore. Faced with an unsolvable problem, before a prospect of doom certain to occur, Saruman's choice to surrender did not stem from the cowardice of one afraid to die. It was the sole and final logical conclusion of a scientist who had seen through the hopelessness of reality. But Saruman's surrender was not giving up and waiting for death. From his extreme perspective, it was the first step to re-establishing a new order from the ashes. To judge Saruman's mindset, we must flip back to his original profile. Saruman was not a creature of nature or poetry. Just like Sauron, before descending to the mortal realm, Saruman was the most outstanding student of Ola, the smith god, who governed earth, stone, minerals, and metallurgy. Saruman's nature was that of a great architect, an engineer. And for an engineer, what is the most important thing? It is order, structure, and efficiency. When that engineer looked down upon Middle-earth in the Third Age, he did not see a romantic world worth risking his life to protect. He only saw a machine that was severely broken and operating extremely inefficiently. Look at the so-called free world at that time. Men were divided, kings were weak, easily corrupted by ambition and power. The elves were arrogant, isolated in their own forests, and refused to cooperate. The dwarves cowered underground, clutching their piles of gold. There was no unified command system, no common vision. Everything was a mess of bickering, petty political schemes, and indiscipline. Through the lens of an intellect that loved perfection like Saruman, this chaos was not just a military risk, it was an insult to logical thinking. How could one fight against a rhythmic, iron-disciplined war machine like Sauron's with a disorganized and divided army? Saruman believed this world was too rotten to heal itself. It needed major surgery. It needed an iron hand ruthless enough to force everything into a framework, an absolute order. This philosophical difference became even more acute when we put Saruman on the scale against his greatest rival, Gandalf. Gandalf chose the method of a missionary. He wandered throughout Middle-earth, smoking pipeweed, chatting with farmers, the little hobbits. Gandalf's strategy was to evoke courage in each individual and leave the rest to the providence of the Creator. Providence. He believed in the kind of miracle born from the small actions of the most vulnerable people. But to Saruman's pragmatic mind, Gandalf's method was the pinnacle of naivety and irresponsibility. Blind faith is not a risk management plan. Saruman's argument was razor-sharp. Why must we entrust the fate of an entire civilization into the hands of chance? Why wait for a miracle from a god who has been silent for thousands of years, while we have enough intellect and power to design a perfect survival machine ourselves? Saruman despised passivity. He disdained the sentimental morality hindering progress. When the world stands on the edge of the abyss, the smart person does not sit down and pray for a wind to lift them up. The smart person proactively smashes the surrounding mountains to build themselves a bridge. And if that bridge requires using the darkest magic, compromising with the most dangerous enemy, Saruman was also ready to dip his hands in the mud to do it. Because in his worldview, the survival of civilization is more important than the cleanliness of one's hands. The climax of this pragmatic philosophy is best demonstrated through the classic dialogue between Saruman and Gandalf at the Tower of Orthanc. When analyzing this scene, we usually hold the prejudice that Saruman is uttering devilish temptations. But if you listen carefully to every word, it is actually a presentation on the greatest diplomatic strategy. Saruman was not threatening Gandalf. He earnestly invited his peer to join an alliance. Listen again to the White Wizard's defense. "We can join with that power. It would be wise, Gandalf. There is hope that way. Its victory is at hand, and there will be rich reward for those that aided it." As the power grows, its proved friends will also grow, and the wise, such as you and I, may with patience come at last to direct its courses, to control it. This is not the language of a psychopathic slave. This is the language of an astute politician, Machiavellian. Saruman argued that, when the enemy is too strong and cannot be defeated by force, the only way to survive is to sit at the negotiating table, even feigning submission to infiltrate their core. Saruman's true intention was never to become a permanent minion for Sauron. His massive pride would not allow him to do that. His true plan was much crazier and grander, to become an ultimate insider. Saruman evaluated Sauron as a giant but unrefined machine of violence. The White Wizard believed that, with his superior intellect, he could stand beside the Dark Lord, feigning obedience, to slowly seize the reins of that machine. He would soften the destruction, minimize casualties for Middle-earth, and preserve the greatest essences of human civilization, as well as the elves from annihilation. In his mind, Saruman was taking on a deeply disgraceful but necessary responsibility. He accepted bearing eternal infamy, accepted tainting his pure white hands, as long as it helped this world avoid a bloody extinction. Faced with absolute doom, clean morality is merely a luxurious and useless piece of jewelry. In philosophy, there is a concept called the lesser evil. When you are bitten by a venomous snake on the arm, you cannot sit hoping the venom will dissipate on its own. You have to chop off that arm yourself to save your life. Saruman chose to chop off the arm. He accepted sacrificing the kingdom of Rohan, sacrificing absolute freedom in exchange for a survival pact under Sauron. Half a life in slavery is still better than total death. Look at the Fellowship of the Ring faction to see the contrast. What was the plan of Gandalf, Elrond, and Aragorn? They decided to hand the fate of the entire civilization, hand the most dangerous weapon in the universe into the hands of two little hobbits. They hoped these two weakest creatures on Earth could walk thousands of miles, slip past hundreds of thousands of orc soldiers, climb an erupting volcano right in the middle of the enemy's lair to destroy the ring. If you are a pragmatic general who only evaluates based on logic and probability, you will see Gandalf's plan is not just naivety, it is suicidal madness, betting the entire life of the world on a dice roll with a 1 in a million win rate. Compared to that crazy gamble, Saruman's decision to deal with the devil to preserve forces sounds completely rational and much more responsible, ruthlessly rational. If we strip away the romantic filter of an epic literary work and place the entire story of The Lord of the Rings onto a realistic geopolitical chessboard of the modern world, Saruman was right. In terms of bare logic, Saruman's calculation was perfect. The Free Faction's plan was a mess of false hopes and suicidal decisions. Any military analyst, if standing in Saruman's position at that time, would also classify Gandalf as an irresponsible madman herding everyone to their deaths. On the chessboard of numbers, pragmatism, and ironclad logic, Saruman was the only player who kept his sanity. Yet, Saruman ultimately still failed miserably. He was defeated not because his math was wrong. He failed because he applied a physical frame of reference to a world operated by the power of spirituality. The biggest tragedy of a great mind like Saruman's is that he became a victim of his own mechanical wisdom. As an engineer obsessed with efficiency, Saruman only believed in what could be weighed and measured. He measured the strength of an army by the number of swords and spears, by the thickness of armor and the speed of iron chains and cogwheels. But in Tolkien's worldview, there are weapons that science and logic can never measure. How could Saruman factor Samwise Gamgee's teeth-gritting loyalty into his mathematical equation? How could he calculate Boromir's redemptive sacrifice? How could a mind that always despised smallness foresee the extraordinary courage of the two hobbits, Merry and Pippin, those who helped awaken the wrath of the old Fangorn forest, dealing the finishing blow to the industrial empire of Isengard? Saruman understood everything about power, but he was completely blind to love, sacrifice, and compassion. He denied the existence of miracles, because miracles are things that break all rules of calculation and order. He evaluated humans merely as weak meat machines, forgetting that, in the most utterly desperate hours, it is the invisible power of the spirit that is the only thing that can bend reality. Saruman's downfall is Tolkien's most resounding indictment against ruthless pragmatism. When intellect is detached from the heart, when efficiency is placed higher than humanity, the self-proclaimed savior will quickly turn into a tyrant. However, before hastily condemning the White Wizard, let's look back at ourselves. Tolkien wrote a fantasy world, sheltered by a creator, possessing a plot armor, protecting the good. But in the cruel, real world we are living in, A world without magic, without gods descending to turn the tide. What then? When facing an erupting volcano of reality, facing brutal forces tens of thousands of times stronger, without a single miracle guaranteeing victory, how many of us would have the courage to choose Gandalf's crazy path? And how many would, in despair and the desire to survive, silently nod and choose Saruman's path of compromise? Saruman the White might be a traitor in the eyes of Middle-earth history, but deep down inside, he is the truest reflection of fear, pragmatism, and the ultimate limit of human reason when standing before the abyss of eternal farewell. If it were you, would you choose to be a dreamer waiting to die like Gandalf, or a pragmatist bearing infamy to survive like Saruman? Share your geopolitical perspective in the comments section below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to continue uncovering the philosophical mysteries of Middle-earth. Goodbye, and see you in the next videos.